My daughter's college fund account was empty. Then I found the transfers. The balance read 0. I refreshed the page, waited for the numbers to populate, and watched the same figure appear again. $0 in an account I had funded every month for 18 years. My daughter's tuition was due in 6 weeks, and the money I had saved, $147,000 at last count, had vanished without a single notification reaching my inbox. I sat very still at the kitchen table. The laptop screen cast a pale glow across my hands. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler clicked through its cycle. I could hear my own breathing, slow and measured, the way it becomes when the body knows something the mind has not yet accepted. I logged out. I logged back in. The account remained empty, and beneath the balance was a transaction history I had never seen before. Dozens of transfers, each one pulling funds to an external account ending in digits I did not recognize. The most recent transfer had occurred 3 days ago. I closed the laptop and poured myself a glass of water. I drank it standing at the sink, looking out at the backyard where my daughter had learned to ride a bicycle, where she had practiced her graduation speech last spring, pacing the flagstones with index cards in her hand. She was at her mother's house now, packing for orientation. She did not know the account was empty. She did not know that someone had been draining it for what appeared to be nearly 2 years. I set the glass down and returned to the table. The question forming in my mind was not who, not yet. The question was how. The account required dual authorization for any withdrawal over $500. I had set that restriction myself when my daughter turned 16, a safeguard against fraud or impulse. The only other person with authorization was my ex-wife, Margaret, and we had not spoken about finances in over a year. Our divorce had been quiet, efficient, a division of assets handled through attorneys and spreadsheets. The college fund was listed clearly in the settlement. It belonged to our daughter. It was not subject to division or dispute. I opened the laptop again and began printing the transaction history. The printer in the next room hummed to life, spitting out page after page. I let it run while I made a pot of coffee. It was 9 in the evening, and I knew I would not sleep. My name is David, and I have worked in corporate finance for 26 years. I understand ledgers. I understand the way money moves, the signatures it leaves, the trails it cannot help but create. I understood, sitting there in the kitchen with the coffee growing cold, that someone had exploited a vulnerability I had not known existed. The transfers were not random. They followed a pattern, small amounts at first, then larger sums, then a final sweep that emptied the account entirely. Whoever had done this understood the system. They knew the thresholds. They knew the timing. I did not call Margaret that night. I did not call the bank. I did not call my daughter. I sat with the printed pages spread across the table and traced the movement of funds from one month to the next, marking the dates, the amounts, the destination account. The destination was consistent. Every transfer went to the same place, an account at a brokerage firm I had never used, held under a name I did not recognize. The name was listed in the transfer details, required by federal regulation for sums above a certain size. The name was not Margaret's. It was not my daughter's. It was mine. The account was registered to David Allen Carr, my full legal name, at an address I had never lived at, with a social security number that matched my own. I set the pages down. The sprinkler outside had stopped. The house was silent. Someone had opened an investment account in my name, linked it to my daughter's college fund, and spent 2 years systematically transferring her tuition money into it. The money was not stolen in the conventional sense. It was moved, redirected, funneled into an account that bore my identity but had never once been touched by my hands. And the question that settled over me, heavy and cold, was not how this had happened. The question was who had access to everything they would need to make it happen. Who knew my social security number, my daughter's account details, the security questions I had chosen a decade ago? Who could authorize transfers on an account that required my signature and Margaret's? I thought about my daughter, asleep in her childhood bedroom at her mother's house, dreaming of lecture halls and new beginnings. I thought about the trust I had placed in systems designed to protect her future. I thought about the name on that brokerage account, my name, and the address I had never seen before. Then I began to work. The next morning, I drove to the bank and requested a meeting with the branch manager. I brought the printed transaction history, a copy of my identification, and a legal pad filled with notes. The manager was a woman in her 40s named Patricia, professional and slightly harried, who examined my documents with a growing furrow between her brows. She confirmed what I already knew. The dual authorization requirement had been removed 18 months ago, changed through the online portal using valid credentials. The security questions had been answered correctly. The request appeared legitimate. There was no flag, no alert, nothing to suggest fraud. I asked who had requested the change. She typed for a moment, then looked up at me with an expression I recognized. It was the expression of someone about to deliver unwelcome news. The request had been submitted from an IP address associated with my home network. The device signature matched a laptop registered to my household. I thanked her and left. I did not own a laptop registered to my household. I used a desktop computer in my home office, secured with two-factor authentication and a password manager. My daughter had her own devices, purchased and registered under her name. The only other person who had lived in my house during the 18 months in question was Margaret. Before the divorce was finalized, during the long, quiet months when we moved around each other like strangers sharing a hallway. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and thought about Margaret. I thought about her careful silences, her attention to detail, her facility with numbers. She had been an accountant before our marriage, had managed our household finances for years. She knew every password, every account, every security question I had ever chosen. She had access to everything. But the brokerage account was not in her name. It was in mine. And the address on the account was unfamiliar, a location I had never visited. I drove home and opened my desktop computer. I logged into the brokerage firm's website using the account number from the transfer records and requested a password reset. The security questions were ones I recognized, the same questions I used for my banking, questions Margaret would have known the answers to. The firm sent a verification code to an email address I had never created, an address using my name at a domain I did not recognize. I was locked out of an account bearing my own identity. I called the brokerage firm directly. The representative was polite, cautious, bound by verification protocols. I explained that an account had been opened in my name without my authorization. She asked for identifying information. I provided it. She asked for the account number. I provided it. She asked me to verify the email address on file. I could not. She told me she would escalate the matter to their fraud department and that I should expect a call within 3 to 5 business days. I thanked her and hung up. 3 to 5 business days. My daughter's tuition was due in 6 weeks. The money was gone, sitting in an account I could not access, managed by someone I had never met. I made a list. I wrote down everything I knew and everything I did not know. I wrote down the questions I needed answered and the steps I would take to answer them. The list filled 2 pages, and when I was finished, I pinned it to the wall above my desk and studied it like a map of foreign territory. The address on the brokerage account was the first thread I chose to pull. It was an office building in a city 2 hours away, a nondescript structure in a commercial district filled with insurance agencies and tax preparers. I found it on a satellite map, zoomed in on the entrance, studied the parking lot and the neighboring businesses. There was nothing remarkable about it. There was nothing that explained why someone would use it as the registered address for a fraudulent investment account. I drove there the following Saturday. I told no one where I was going. The building was exactly as it appeared in the Yahoo photographs, a 3-story rectangle with tinted windows and a small lobby. The directory inside listed a dozen businesses, mostly financial services. One of them was a wealth management firm with a name I did not recognize. The suite number matched the address on the brokerage account. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor and walked down a carpeted hallway. The door to the suite was unlocked. Inside was a small reception area with a desk, 2 chairs, and a water cooler. No receptionist, no waiting clients. The walls were bare except for a framed certificate I could not read from the doorway. A man emerged from an inner office. He was younger than me, perhaps 40, wearing a dress shirt with no tie. He smiled and asked if he could help me. I told him I was looking for information about an investment account. I gave him the account number. His expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker of recognition he could not entirely suppress. He asked me to have a seat. He said he would check his records. I sat in one of the chairs and watched him disappear into the inner office. I could hear him speaking, his voice low and indistinct. I waited. When he returned, he was no longer smiling. He told me he had no record of the account number I had provided. He told me his firm did not manage accounts at the brokerage in question. He suggested I contact the brokerage directly. I thanked him and left. I did not believe a word he had said. In the parking lot, I photographed the building, the suite number, the name on the door. I wrote down the license plates of the 3 cars parked nearby. I saved everything to a folder on my phone, labeled with the date. On the drive home, I called an old friend from my days in corporate audit. His name was Thomas, and he had retired 2 years ago to consult on financial investigations. I told him I had a problem. He asked me to describe it. I described it. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that changed the shape of everything I thought I knew. He said the setup I was describing, the ghost account, the redirected funds, the false address, was a technique he had seen before. It was used to shelter assets during divorce proceedings. It created a paper trail that pointed to the spouse being defrauded, not the spouse doing the defrauding. If the scheme was discovered, the money appeared to be hidden by the victim, not the perpetrator. It was elegant, it was vicious, it was almost impossible to unwind without extensive documentation. I asked him who typically executed such a scheme. He said it required access to financial records, knowledge of security protocols, and a relationship with someone willing to act as a front, someone who could register accounts and manage transfers without leaving a direct connection to the person benefiting. I thought about the man in the office, his momentary recognition, his careful denial. I thought about Margaret, her silences, her skill with numbers. I thought about the timing of the transfers, beginning shortly after we separated, accelerating as the divorce finalized. I asked Thomas what I should do. He said I needed documentation, proof of the fraud, a clear trail connecting the perpetrator to the scheme. Without that, I had only suspicion. Without that, the money would remain where it was, locked in an account bearing my name, managed by someone I could not identify. I thanked him and hung up. The next week, I requested copies of every document related to my divorce, the settlement agreement, the financial disclosures, the asset inventories. I spread them across my dining room table and read them with the attention of an auditor reviewing a failing company. Margaret's financial disclosure was thorough. It listed her income, her savings, her retirement accounts. It listed debts and obligations. It did not list the brokerage account. It did not mention the wealth management firm. But it did include, in the section detailing professional relationships, the name of a financial advisor she had consulted during the marriage. The name was unfamiliar. I searched for it online. The advisor had worked for a firm in the same city as the office I had visited. He had left that firm 3 years ago. His current employer was the wealth management company whose name was on the door I had walked through. I sat back in my chair. The house was quiet. Outside, the evening light was fading, and the street lamps were beginning to glow. Margaret had a relationship with the man I had met. She had consulted him during our marriage. He had access to our financial information, our account numbers, our security protocols. He had the expertise to construct the scheme Thomas had described, and he had looked me in the eye and told me he had no record of the account draining my daughter's future. I did not call Margaret. I did not confront the advisor. I did not do anything that night except sit in the darkening house and think about what I had learned and what I still needed to prove. The fraud department at the brokerage firm called me 4 days later. The representative was apologetic. They had reviewed the account in question and found irregularities. The account had been opened using documentation that appeared legitimate, but had since been flagged for verification failures. They were freezing the account pending investigation. They could not tell me how long the investigation would take. I asked about the funds in the account. She said the balance was approximately $132,000. She could not release it without resolution of the fraud claim. She could not estimate when resolution would occur. I thanked her and asked her to send me written confirmation of everything she had told me. She agreed. The money was frozen. It was not recovered. It was sitting in limbo, inaccessible to me, inaccessible to whoever had taken it, while my daughter's tuition deadline crept closer. I called my bank and requested a personal loan using my home as collateral. The process would take 2 weeks. The funds would cover the tuition. I would pay interest on money that should never have left the college fund. That night, I called my daughter. I did not tell her about the fraud. I did not tell her about the investigation. I told her I was proud of her. I told her the tuition was handled. I listened to her talk about her roommate assignment and her course schedule. And when she asked if everything was okay, I said yes. I said everything was fine. After we hung up, I sat in my office and looked at the wall where I had pinned my list of questions. Most of them remained unanswered, but the shape of the answer was becoming clear, and I knew what I needed to do next. I hired a forensic accountant. Her name was Linda, and Thomas had recommended her. She specialized in tracing funds through complex financial structures. I gave her everything I had: the transaction records, the brokerage statements, the information about the wealth management firm. She said she would need 2 weeks to complete her analysis. During those 2 weeks, I did something I had not done since the divorce. I reached out to Margaret's sister, a woman named Carol, who had always been kind to me, who had sent a card when the papers were signed, expressing regret that things had ended the way they had. I invited her to coffee. She accepted. We met at a quiet cafe near her office. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. We talked about neutral things at first: the weather, her children, my daughter's college plans. Then I asked how Margaret was doing. Carol's expression tightened. She said Margaret was fine. She said Margaret had been seeing someone, a man she had met through work. She said the relationship had been going on for some time, longer than Carol had initially realized. I asked how long. Carol hesitated. Then she said she believed it had started before the separation, perhaps significantly before. I thanked her for her honesty. I did not ask any more questions about Margaret. I finished my coffee and we parted with promises to stay in touch that we both knew we would not keep. The forensic accountant called me on a Wednesday evening. Her voice was precise, professional, but I could hear something beneath it, a note of something that might have been respect or might have been concern. She had traced the funds. The transfers from my daughter's college account had gone to the brokerage account registered in my name. From there, the money had been invested, managed, grown by a small percentage. But that was not where the trail ended. The brokerage account had a linked bank account for deposits and withdrawals. That bank account was held by a limited liability company. The LLC was registered in a state with minimal disclosure requirements, but Linda had found the formation documents. The registered agent was the wealth management firm I had visited. The beneficial owner, listed in filings that were supposed to be confidential, but had been obtained through legal discovery requests, was Margaret. She had created a shell company. She had linked it to an account in my name. She had used it to siphon my daughter's college fund into investments she controlled, hidden behind layers of corporate structure designed to obscure ownership. And if the scheme had never been discovered, she would have kept the money, grown it, and accessed it whenever she chose, while I bore the apparent responsibility for its disappearance. I asked Linda to prepare a full report. I asked her to document every transaction, every link, every piece of evidence connecting Margaret to the fraud. She said she would have it ready within a week. I sat in my office after the call ended. The house was dark. I had not turned on the lights. I thought about Margaret, about the years we had spent together, about the quiet erosion of trust that had preceded our separation. I thought about the way she had handled the divorce, her calm efficiency, her insistence on dividing assets fairly. I thought about the financial advisor, his careful lies, his willingness to participate in a scheme that stole from a child. I thought about my daughter packing her bags for college, trusting that her future was secure. Then I began to plan. The report arrived on a Friday. It was 47 pages long, dense with exhibits and appendices. I read it twice, marking passages, noting connections. When I was finished, I knew I had enough. I contacted my attorney, a man named Richard who had handled my divorce and who I trusted completely. I told him what I had found. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he asked what I wanted to do. I said I wanted my daughter's money returned. I wanted the fraud documented and reported. I wanted consequences. He said the path I was describing would be difficult. It would involve civil litigation against Margaret and potentially criminal referrals against the financial advisor. It would take time. It would be expensive. It would be painful. I said I understood. He said he would begin preparing the filings. He said I should expect contact from Margaret's attorney once she learned what was coming. He said I should prepare myself for her to deny everything, to claim ignorance, to shift blame. I said I was prepared. The filings were submitted the following Tuesday. The civil complaint named Margaret as the defendant, alleging fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion. It requested full restitution of the stolen funds plus damages. It included Linda's report as an exhibit, every transaction traced, every corporate veil pierced. Margaret's attorney called Richard the same day. The conversation was brief. Margaret denied the allegations. She claimed the accounts had been set up by the financial advisor without her knowledge. She claimed she was a victim, not a perpetrator. I had anticipated this. Linda's report anticipated it too. The beneficial ownership filing had been signed by Margaret. The LLC's bank account showed deposits that corresponded to her personal financial patterns. The financial advisor had emailed her directly, using her personal address, discussing the account's performance. The emails were in the discovery production. She could not explain them away. The attorney called again 2 days later. The tone was different. There was talk of settlement, of resolution, of avoiding the publicity of a trial. I told Richard to listen, but not to agree to anything. The negotiation took 3 weeks. Margaret's position eroded steadily as each piece of evidence was introduced. The financial advisor, facing potential criminal liability, began cooperating with investigators. He provided statements, he provided records, he provided the full picture of a scheme that Margaret had conceived and he had executed. The final settlement was signed on a Thursday afternoon. Margaret agreed to full restitution of the stolen funds, plus interest, plus my legal fees. The brokerage account was liquidated, and the proceeds transferred to a new college fund account in my daughter's name, one that Margaret could not access. The financial advisor's license was revoked pending a hearing. The matter was referred to the state attorney general for potential prosecution. I did not attend the signing. Richard handled it. He called me afterward and said it was done. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had discovered the theft, and listened to the silence. My daughter's tuition was paid. Her future was secure. The money was returned. But something else had been taken, something that could not be returned. Trust. The belief that the people closest to you will not betray you. The faith that the systems designed to protect your family will actually protect them. I called my daughter that evening. I told her there had been a problem with the college fund, but that it was resolved. I told her not to worry. She asked what kind of problem. I said I would explain when she was settled at school, when she was ready to hear it. She accepted that. She trusted me. After we hung up, I walked out into the backyard. The evening was warm, and the sky was turning colors I did not have names for. I stood where my daughter had stood practicing her graduation speech, and I thought about what I had learned. I had learned that betrayal does not announce itself. It comes quietly, through systems you trust, through people you love, through the ordinary machinery of daily life. I had learned that patience is a form of strength, that documentation is a form of protection, that the truth, pursued methodically, will eventually surface. I had learned that I could rebuild what was broken, not the marriage, not the trust, but the future, my daughter's future. That was what mattered. That was what I had fought for. I stood in the backyard until the light was gone, and the stars began to appear. Then I went inside and made dinner. I ate alone, as I had done for months, but the solitude felt different now. It felt like something I had chosen rather than something that had been imposed. The next morning, I woke early. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and began making a new list. Not a list of questions, a list of plans, things I wanted to do, places I wanted to visit, books I wanted to read, a life I wanted to build now that the crisis was past. The first item on the list was simple. Visit my daughter at school. See her new life. Let her show me who she was becoming. I finished my coffee and began my day. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like a place where difficult things had happened and been survived. It felt like home. Some months later, my daughter called me on a Sunday afternoon. She was between classes, sitting in the campus library, her voice bright with the particular energy of someone discovering new things. She said her economics professor had mentioned forensic accounting in lecture. She said she had thought of me. I asked what the professor had said. She described a case study, a fraud scheme involving hidden accounts and shell companies. She said she had raised her hand and told the class her father had uncovered something similar. She said the professor had asked her to stay after class and tell him more. I listened to her describe the conversation, her pride in what I had done, her curiosity about the details she did not yet know. I told her I would explain everything when I visited. I told her I was proud of her for speaking up. After we hung up, I sat for a while, thinking about the strange paths that lead us to understanding. My daughter would learn the full story eventually. She would learn about her mother's betrayal, the advisor's complicity, the long investigation that had recovered her future. She would have to integrate that knowledge into her understanding of her family, her history, herself. But she would do it from a position of security. She would do it knowing that someone had fought for her when she did not know she needed fighting for. She would do it knowing that the systems can fail, but people can still choose to do what is right. That, I had come to believe, was the only inheritance that truly mattered. Not money, though money was necessary. Not reputation, though reputation could be rebuilt. The inheritance that mattered was the knowledge that someone had stood between you and harm. The knowledge that you were worth protecting. I had given my daughter that inheritance. Whatever else Margaret had taken, she had not taken that. The evening light was failing. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where so much had happened. The grass needed cutting, the flagstones needed sweeping. There was work to do, the ordinary work of maintaining a life. I turned from the window and began.